So Forbes magazine is a magazine that's read by people in the corporate world, financial world. I'm guessing most of you have a copy on your coffee table and browse through it. It's a fairly high-end magazine. I'm sure Dave Dundas as well. Forbes magazine. So they recently hosted this is from, I think, last year. So they recently, this is a true story, hosted its second annual Jargon Madness competition. Jargon Madness competition. This tournament-style bracket featured 32 of corporate America's most insufferable expressions. So the most annoying ones that you can find. And readers voted for the worst of the bunch. So then they got rated. So 32 horrible jargon-type sayings, insufferable expressions. This year's winner, come to Jesus moment. As in, if Joe doesn't improve his productivity, he and I are going to have a come to Jesus moment. Oh, God. So, I don't know if you've ever heard that expression. Maybe you don't live enough in the corporate world. But apparently it's one that's out there. Come to Jesus moment. So CTJM, short form for come to Jesus moment, edged out onboarding, ridiculous jargon for training new recruits, onboarding, in the championship bout. Frankly, how onboarding managed to beat punch a puppy, which means to do something for which you will be detested, is one of life's great mysteries. You think that would be way worse. Okay, so that's a little something I found out about how the kind of that phraseology, come to Jesus, is bandied about rather freely in our society. And of course, in this instance, it doesn't have a very positive connotation. It's kind of a negative and scary thing. It means to be pulled up in the carpet before your boss and be confronted for something. You'll have a come to Jesus moment. And since this is basically a come to Jesus sermon, I hope you're not going to look at that phrase in that from that perspective. I'm hoping you'll kind of see it as a gentle thing and a wonderful thing to come to Jesus. Now, so what's it really mean, come to Jesus? It gets thrown around a lot and it's used in the church a lot. And I think I know, and to me it's very simple, and yet it's not so simple. Because I think if it was simple, a whole lot more people would do it, and they clearly don't. I also hope and suspect that maybe all of us or most of us have actually had a come to Jesus moment of the good kind, where we've encountered Jesus Christ in our lives. We've come to Jesus, and it's been a wonderful thing. So, but how to explain it to someone who hasn't is a total other cup of tea. So I'm going to give a little bit of a whack at trying to do that a little bit. So it kind of suggests prayer, I would say. Although I hesitate to use the word because people that do this for the first time probably aren't really thinking of themselves as praying. Because, prayer, it may be something that's unfamiliar to them. So, but prayer is simply, talking to or communicating with in the heart or in the mind. It can be done silently or out loud to the God who is there, or Jesus who is there. So of course, this kind of infers a few things, like if you're going to come to Jesus, that Jesus actually is here, he's around. He may be invisible, but he's present, and he's available. That's inferred. And so praying is part of it, or talking, and it's also kind of inclining the heart in his direction, right? So it's inclining the heart, opening up the heart. The classic case, I suppose, is what's called the sinner's prayer, which you've maybe done, you've maybe heard about. It gets used a lot in various circles within Christendom. And, I don't really have it down pat. It has many varieties. It's very, very simple. It's kind of like, dear Jesus, dear God, please forgive me and come into my heart and change me and let me get to know you. Something like that, right? You may have your own version. And which is perfectly legit. There's nothing in the Bible that says that's the way to do it, but it's a way that people have come to Jesus. So it involves faith to some degree. It involves some degree of faith, not necessarily a lot. You can have just a teeny weeny bit. which kind of like in the gospel story where the father has brought his child to Jesus and looking for his help, and Jesus says, well, do you believe? And the guy says, well, I believe. Please help my unbelief. I got a little bit. So help, and Jesus willingly heals his child. So you don't have to have a whole lot. You just, a grain of mustard seed, just a little wee tittle bit is all we need to get started. And even without that, there's a thing called honesty, which works too. Kind of lowest common denominator, honesty. People that don't know God, don't believe in his existence, are very skeptical about the whole thing, can experiment, as far as I'm concerned, and with the God who is there, and say, well, God, I don't know. Again, I'm making this up on the spot. God, I don't really think you're there, but maybe you are. I want to be open to that possibility. And Jesus, if you're real, which I don't really think, but please somehow show me, help me. I don't know. How about that? So it's the cynic's prayer. It's just pure honesty. And if it's from the heart, God honors that, and God answers that, and God responds to that, in my belief. So whatever it is, seeking come to Jesus, it involves seeking help. It has to do with that. You're seeking grace, you're seeking forgiveness, which comes through the cross of Christ. You're seeking assistance in life, you're seeking wisdom, you're seeking strength, you're seeking compassion. Something like that. Something beyond yourself, something that you don't have the wherewithal within yourself for. And the people around you don't have the wherewithal either. So you got to go someplace more powerful. So that's what I think it means to come to Jesus. Kind of. And you've probably got your own ideas. So why? Why do we emphasize this coming to Jesus? Well, the simple reason is Jesus tells us to. Jesus threw out the invitation, which Gwen read this morning. It's Matthew 11, chapter 11, verse 28. Jesus just says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And then he goes on from there. He just says, "Come to me. Come to me." Now, it doesn't say, Jesus does not say, this is intriguing actually, he does not say come to church. He does not say come to the pastor. He does not say come to religion. He doesn't even say come to God. Intriguingly, he says, "Come to me, and I personally will give you rest." Interesting. So it's actually a little bit, it's somewhat outrageous in a sense. Because, and once again, I would say it infers that he himself is God and knows it. Because otherwise, it's rather blasphemous to encourage people to come to you as though you were God. And I'm going to give you rest. Don't worry about God, just come to me. So Jesus is actually inferring his godness in this passage. But the key thing is that we're to come to Jesus Christ. And it's come to the person of Jesus Christ. This is the call of the gospel. This is the call of the good news. It's not a come to a set of religious beliefs. It's not a come to a church building. I mean, those things may be part and parcel of it. But the core thing, the good news is come to Jesus himself and get the things that you need right there from him personally. And have a personal connection with nobody else between you and him, just you and him. Now he says, he actually addresses this to a certain portion of the population. All you who are weary and burdened. And now some of you will recall the good old King James Version. All you who labor and are heavy laden. Labor and are heavy laden. Weary and burdened. A weary land. Weary seems to be the key word here today. My God is a rock in a weary land. Now, who are those people? Who's weary and burdened? Surely none of us here today. Well, maybe we are. And it could be very simple. I mean, to be weary and burdened could be you're just tired, really tired. You're worn out. You're burnt out. Your joy's gone. You're at your wit's end. You're overcome with responsibilities, or you're overcome with grief, or you're overcome with the weariness of dealing with some kind of sickness or sorrow or stress or anxiety. It could be all those things. Or it could be, and quite possibly it means those things, for sure. But it could be we're frustrated or wearied with our inability to be better people. Now, that would infer that you really care about being a better person, being a good person. And you've worked at it really hard, and you're frustrated by it. The other churches, we read this passage from Romans, which is awesome, just a great passage. It explains it so well. And this is from Romans 7. Paul says this, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. And he says it differently in verse 19. For what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Sound familiar? It oughta, because it's you. And it's me. And Paul was a guy that took being good seriously. I mean, he was a Pharisee, for Pete's sake. And he realized this. At some point in his life, he realized that he was just, he was chasing his tail, and he was super frustrated because he was incapable of himself to be the good person that he really idealized himself as being. So it could be that. Now, when I look around in our generation, in our society, I don't see too many people really worried about that. I mean, maybe, hopefully, to some degree, you and I are. But in our day, all kinds of things are, fine. Everybody's got their own code of conduct, and basically it's whatever they do, that's a good thing. And they've justified it. So all kinds of lying, for instance, lying is commonplace. It's just expected in our society. Hypocrisy, commonplace. Coveting is encouraged. That's actually one of the 10 Commandments, right? Thou shalt not covet. But in our world, the temptation to covetousness is nearly endless. We're just bombarded with all the things that the other guys got that we should have too. Right? All kinds of practices, sexual practices are thrown out there as kind of okay and normal for some, and don't worry about it. Idolatry is rampant, and idolatry is whatever allures your heart and your affection, and you get your security in, that isn't God. And there's a lot of that around. People got their security in all kinds of things except God. And their affection, their deepest affection, is tied to those things. That's idolatry. And I could go on. But what I'm saying is, we have a society who really doesn't care that much. They don't know about those kind of God's law, the 10 Commandments, if you will. There's some evangelists nowadays, I forget the name of the one fellow, but he's very strong on that. Basically, if we're going to take the gospel to our world today, we have to first slam them with the law. We got to teach them the 10 Commandments and really sock it to them until they know that they're in grievous error and sinfulness. And then, there's a certain logic in this. Like, why would somebody come to the cross of Christ for forgiveness, if they don't see any need to be forgiven? So how will you know that you need to be forgiven unless you know here's the standard and here's how much you fell short? So there's a certain logic to that, and I've played with that idea a little bit. I have never pursued it for two reasons. One, it doesn't work. Whenever people kind of lambaste people with the law as Christians, they see you as judgmental, and they see you as heavy-handed, and it's a big turnoff. Two, that's not the way I see it happening in the New Testament. When the early apostles went to take the gospel of Jesus to people, I don't see them laying out the law before people to make them feel awful and guilty first. But you get my point, right? There are those in our world who really do care about, and in Jesus' world, in the first instance when Jesus preached this particular sermon, he had a bunch of perhaps the peasants and the local farmers and fishermen and the like in Galilee, and he's laying this out to them, and he's saying, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden." And they were Jews. They knew the law. They knew that they'd fallen short. In addition, they were surrounded by people like the Pharisees and the scribes who pretended, at least, or convinced everybody that they were better than them and that you should live up to our standards. So they felt oppressed by that as well. So when Jesus says, "All you that labor and are heavy laden," that's where they knew he knew whereof he spoke with respect to their own feelings and experience. So it could be that we just take the world's problems and needs very seriously. I mean, we care. And if Christ is actually at work in your life, you will care. And you look around and you see a world full of deceit and full of crime and full of, what's the word? I'm thinking of the word where people are corruption. Thank you. It's full of corruption, in all segments of society. It's a world where people steal children and make them slaves and sell them and stuff like that, commonplace. Or they bring them into their armies and chop off their arms if they don't do what they're supposed to do, or they try to escape. We live in a world where that kind of stuff happens. There's a huge drug trade. There's huge piles of addiction and poverty. And are you starting to feel weary and heavy laden yet? Because it's real, and we care, and we're probably engaged and involved with that to some degree. We give to some missions or whatever that has to do with that. Is it ever enough? Are we making a difference? Or just even in our local world, where we see there are very few ideas. Everyone does what is right in their own eyes. We see the decline of the church. I don't want to get complaining with this, but the church has declined. People don't know the gospel. They don't know the stories of Jesus. They don't know the stories of the Bible. There's a grand ignorance. If Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth, salt preserves the society. Now, if there's going to be less and less salt in our society, what is there to preserve it? That's a concern. And so we're engaged in the mission of God to bring the good news through our deeds and through our words to the world around us, and to be wise about it. And boy, I got to tell you, it seems like we're going uphill and it's rolling back on us. But to all that, Jesus says, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and if you weren't before I started this, I hope you feel that way. No. He says, and I will give you rest. I will give you rest. In other words, I'm going to take that burden right off of you. I'm going to give you rest. It's his promise. Jesus promises to give us rest if we come to him with this burden. As you know, I like to canoe trip. Last 20, 30 years, it's been once a year. I go on a canoe trip. Canoe trips are fun, but there's this thing called the portage. And it's, sometimes they're 600 to 800 meters long. And you've got this huge pack on your back, or you've got a big old canoe on your shoulders, and you're going up a hill that it feels like it's like that, like about it's actually probably only that, but it actually does feel like that. And so you've got about 3/4 of the way, and then some young fella that's just so keen, they've run up to the other end of the portage with their canoe, their pack, and a whole bunch of other stuff they've been trailing along, and they're running back to get another load, and they see you and they say, hey, you want me to take that? Yeah. Thank you. And it's just like you're decompressed, because when you're carrying all that stuff, you're just pushed down, and your spine is getting shoved, compressed. So it just uncompacts you. What a sweet relief it is. That's what Jesus does. When you come to him with your burden, he decompresses you and he lifts it off you. Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. So that's what he's talking about. Now he goes on. He says, take my yoke upon you and learn of me. And this is his invitation. He says, come on in further now. I've taken your load, but I want more. Take my yoke upon you. Now, most of us aren't farmers that farm with yoke. But back in Jesus' day, common sight. So everybody knew what a yoke was, and you probably do. So it's, how you join two animals, usually oxen, which are just cattle, together to pull the plow in the field. So the yoke goes across the neck of each of the beasts, usually two. And then they pull together as a team. So what Jesus is saying is hop in and join me as a team. Be a team member with me. And we're going to pull together. We're going to pull together. Now we know Jesus is going to do the heavy pulling. So he's the strong one. But he says, come on. And he says, so pull with me. It's another expression also in Jesus' day for taking on the yoke meant to allow some person to be your mentor, your teacher, and to show you, how to live. So it meant to sit at their feet was another expression. Take your yoke upon, and he says, and learn of me. Learn of me. Study me. Soak yourself in the way I am. Discover me. And that's why I think it's so important to if this is the only time in the week you do, come to church and listen to the Gospels read. Or come to a Bible study. Or just read the Gospels yourself. And just keep meditating and reviewing Jesus, what he's like. His disposition, his trustworthiness. I mean, his authoritativeness, his all the characteristics of him, and the wisdom that poured from his lips. How many lessons were there? 10. Let me tell you about lesson 10. I forget and it's got all the stages. Jesus doing this and Jesus doing that, and that's a good thing to just think about, because that's learning of him. And now he adds to that this crazy thing. He says, learn of me, for I am meek and humble in heart. For I am meek, he says, and humble in heart, or lowly of heart, King James. Now that's one of the sweetest, most wonderful, almost offhanded remarks in all of Scripture. This guy who is the Savior of the world, he tells us of this about himself. I am meek and lowly of heart. See, some of the hardest and scariest things that you and I do when we go to get help somewhere, that's a hard, scary thing to do. It's a humbling thing to do. So, for instance, say you got to go to the bank and talk to the loans officer to get a loan, right? It's scary. Because you probably haven't saved enough, you haven't been thrifty enough, you don't budget well enough, and you got to stand there and see if you're going to get approved. Maybe none of you have ever had that experience, but I have. Or you go to the dentist and, really haven't been taking good care of your teeth, like not brushing and things, not flossing. And you go to the dentist and you know you're going to need some work, and they're going to tell you. Or you go to the doctor, and you haven't really been eating the way they told you should be eating, and you haven't been exercising the way they told you should have been exercising, and maybe you put on a little bit of weight. Shut up, right? And they're going to have a word or two with you. Now, the thing is, you're really hoping that they won't judge you. You're hoping that they'll understand your frailty and that they won't come down on you, right? Isn't that your hope when you go to one of those situations? Maybe this stuff never phases you guys. But some of us it does. And Jesus is like that, though. He is one that you go to, and he will not judge you. He understands totally our frailty, and he will not come down on us. He says, come to me, I am meek and lowly of heart. I get you. I get where you're coming from. I've walked your walk. I understand your weakness and your frailty. And that's a pretty wonderful thing. That's how accessible he is for us. He is meek and humble and lowly of heart. And there are two kind of corollaries to that. That's a mathematical term, connected truths. Flip side is a good word. It's kind of like a flip side of a coin, except that I've got two flip sides to this coin, which means I'd have to have a three-sided coin. So if the first side, the heads is, I am meek and lowly of heart. What that infers and tells us is that God himself, the Almighty God, is meek and lowly of heart. And I love thinking about that. Because that's not the way we tend to think about the living God. But that is absolutely what he's like, because that's what Jesus is like. So the living God is actually lowly of heart. He's the lowliest hearted being that exists. And that's pretty sweet when we think of coming to him with our needs. And the second corollary or flip side, that's why so that was heads, tails, ears. Is that, if we are putting his yoke on us and we are learning of him, and he is meek and lowly of heart, is that we're going to become meek and lowly of heart. We're going to become it. I'm not saying we aren't. But we're on the way. And that's what God is after with us. He says, a broken and a contrite heart I will not despise. He looks for us to be meek and lowly of heart. That's his goal with us. Now, what I've discovered with my life is that by nature, I am not meek and lowly of heart. But I've been hanging out with Jesus for like 30 or 40 years. And the more I hang out with Jesus, the more I get to be more meek and lowly of heart than I was before. Because when you rub shoulders with Jesus, that's what happens. Inevitably. Now, when Jesus says learn of me, it doesn't mean just get some head information about me, find out some history about me. It's get to know me, connect with me. When we connect with him, by golly, you and I will be humbled. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Because pride and arrogance and full of self, I don't mean self-confidence. I mean being full of ourselves and, arrogant. That kind of stuff, that is a huge burden on our backs. To get rid of that is sweet freedom. And we become like who we are. We become like the child that we started out being, childlike. So, and then he just repeats after this. He says, and you will find rest. He says it, this is the second time he said it, and you will find rest. And he adds something to it, to your souls. He's like deep, deep within your being, you will find rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And my yoke is easy. So that yoke that you put on, not hard. It's easy. And the burden, see, you exchange burdens. He takes his big heavy weight burden that's heavy laden, and he gives you his own burden, which is very light. There's a huge sack of rocks you drop, and you pick up a nice little pack with a couple of bottles of water and a sandwich inside. It's a wonderful switch. It's something you can handle for life. Okay, so I hope that helps. I'm just going to finish with a quote. This passage from The Message, which is, The Message is a paraphrase of the Bible, written by Eugene Peterson. So it's not actual translation. It's kind of an interpretive translation. And you may have read it. It's wonderful at times, and I think it's really good at this part. So just listen to this. He says, are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Come to Jesus. Fear not. Shall we pray?